Welcome to Journey Home to Self. This is a place for us to explore the milestones, the roadblocks, the pit stops, and the breathtaking sights on the most important journey of our lives. The journey of coming back home to you. My hope is that through the stories, insights, knowledge, and wisdom we share here, you get inspired and activated to widely fall in love with choosing yourself every single moment. I'm your host, Sarah Aviram, and I am truly so excited and honored that you are here. Let's dive in and journey home to self together. Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Journey Home to Self. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. Today on this episode, we are answering a pretty timely question. Does more freedom at work mean more fulfillment? The last 3 years have changed the way people work. The words remote work or hybrid is something that we had not even heard of. But there was one person who was researching it way before it was cool. And that's our guest for today, my friend Sarah Aviram. Sarah is a former Fortune 500 human resources and talent development leader. After working remotely from 12 countries in 12 months in 2019, researching the future of work, she published the best-selling book, Remotivation, the remote worker's ultimate guide to life-changing fulfillment. Sarah is an international keynote speaker and workshop facilitator for organizations globally on the topics of remote work, hybrid teams, and change resilience. Her recent TED Talk called Does More Freedom at Work Mean More Fulfillment was chosen as an editor's pick by TEDx headquarters. And the talk is a must listen. I will link it up in the show notes and I would love for you to go and check it out and share it and leave comments on it. It is such a timely conversation and the way Sarah puts the message across is so brilliant. And that's why I invited her to speak on the podcast today, because one of the things that Sarah talks about is that happiness is a feeling that doesn't last, and usually that's what we chase. But fulfillment is richer and long lasting, and I absolutely loved that. Today on this episode, we're going to talk about how to know if something is what you really want or what you've been conditioned to want. And Sarah will share her personal experience behind that. She will also talk about how to renegotiate spoken or unspoken agreements and expectations with yourself and with others. And she's going to talk about 6 components of fulfillment and what drives our career decisions. I am so excited about this conversation. This all goes back to Journey Home to Self, and I am excited that this conversation is reaching far and wide. So let's go ahead and welcome Sarah. Sarah, so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
And you're joining us from Mexico City.
I am. Yes, it's been my home for a little less than a year.
So exciting. Okay, I want to get to it. So juicy, such a juicy topic today. You started working remotely before it was cool to do so. You were way ahead of the times.
A little bit ahead.
So tell us, how did you even think of it? I don't even know if this was a thing back then in 2019.
Yeah, so actually, I'll take you back to the end of 2018. I was the director of talent development for a New York-based tech company. So I was in charge of all the training and development programs for employees. And I was researching future work trends, and all signs were really pointing to this remote work future. Now, COVID-19 definitely accelerated that by at least a decade.
Wow.
But even back then, the research was showing that more and more employees wanted the freedom and flexibility to work from anywhere. And more organizations were creating themselves as distributed first or remote first with no offices or, principal office anywhere. And I thought that was really fascinating. As someone that was the head of talent for the company, I really knew I had to figure out, okay, how do we attract and retain the best talent in the organization? And that person might not be located in the city of our principal office. So what are the challenges and opportunities of hiring people remotely and letting people work remotely? And I was like, I want to be a guinea pig. I want to figure it out and like experience what it would be like. And through my research, I found out about a company called Remotier. So they're not a job provider, but they facilitate your ability to work and live in different countries around the world with a cohort of other professionals. And Remotier provides the living accommodations, the co-working spaces, and the community of people that you're traveling with for a year. You pay a fee, but they kind of take care of the rest. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. I get to travel the world, which is something I love to do. Someone else plans it. I get to focus on doing my job. And I pitched it to my CEO. And, I made it really sound like we're going to be at the forefront of the future of work and understand the opportunities and challenges remote workers face. And he was like, let's do it. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, I was ready for him to say, oh, that sounds nice in theory, but no. But he went for it. And a month later, I, took off and I was in a different country every month for 12 months in 2019.
Amazing.
And from Peru to Vietnam to Spain. And in addition to just doing my job remotely, I was interviewing remote workers, doing surveys and focus groups to really understand, who was being successful and motivated and feeling good about their work and who was feeling really challenged. And I know we'll get into this, but really the main takeaway from all of that was that expression, wherever you go, there you are. So if you hated your job in Houston, you're going to hate it in Hanoi, right?
Yeah.
So I found that so many people thought that once they were working remotely and had that freedom and flexibility, that they would feel fulfilled and motivated, but it was kind of just a Band-Aid solution. And in the long term, they were like, something's still missing. Like I still feel like something's off. I thought working from the beach would make me happy, but it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, it's kind of like how you described in your TED Talk as well, when the pandemic hit and everybody was kind of forced to work remotely. And I believe that, and I could be wrong, but maybe your research was pointing towards a world where people are able to travel anywhere they want to and have more freedom. But here, people were forced to work out of home and, be a parent as well as a teacher and all of that. And I remember initially it was great. It was like the best thing that had happened to us, especially for us at home. My husband was in a travel job. So for my kids to see him every day, it was so cool. Like, we would play board games. We would go for bike rides in the evening. We would play in the yard. We would have a picnic. We would, like, my husband would turn on the stereo in the car. We would have the boot open. We would literally have a picnic in our front yard. And then it got to the point where it became very boring and very stressful for everybody. Was that your experience in, interviewing people as well?
Yeah, it was like, it's funny because we were choosing to have this experience, right? So unlike the pandemic where people were forced to do it, we were choosing it. And even with this sort of extreme amount of freedom and flexibility, people were still like, I don't know, I still feel stuck. And this is when the light bulb went off. I'm like, ooh, this is interesting. What is it? Why is it that, it's not all that they thought it would be?
Right.
So I started to, through that research and interviews I did, identified really 6 core drivers of our motivation and fulfillment. And that has to do with our relationship to our money, our identity, routines, growth, impact, and joy. And, just to kind of review them quickly, like if we feel like we're just making enough money to make ends meet and pay the bills, we don't have the luxury of, doing work that we love or feeling like we're making an impact. So it's important to really figure out, how do I make a certain amount of money that makes me feel comfortable and confident, or build that safety net, reduce expenses, or increase income somehow so that I feel that I can make choices in my career based on my internal motivations and not this fear or pressure of I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. But then you also had people like some lawyers that I met while traveling that were making so much money. And even though they hated their jobs, they're like, well, what else would I do? How could I make this kind of money? I don't know how my skill set transfers to something else. Right. And they have what they call the golden handcuffs, right? So it's like they're just staying in a job, even though they don't like it, because they're making that kind of money. So once we can kind of understand how much money do I really need to make to live the lifestyle that I want?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I build that safety net so that I can change or pivot or do something that's really more fulfilling for me? So that's kind of the first step. As I noticed that people who had figured out that money portion, they move on to the next step, which is the identity. Because some people, it's about, well, I thought I would be a vice president by this age. Or if I'm not a lawyer, who am I? It's such
Right.
so much part of my identity, or the expectations I have of myself or my parents had for me. So that kind of, component of like, what should I be doing versus what I want to be doing? So people could kind of figure out that difference and
Yeah.
let go of those kind of unspoken agreements maybe they have with people in their lives.
Yeah.
They could feel good about that.
How would someone do that? Because I think that's when we talk about identity, and we talk about identity a lot on this podcast, because I feel like that's a
Mhm.
differentiator between, yourself and your higher self that we are all moving towards. How to know if there is something that you genuinely want? In this case, some people thought they wanted to travel around the world and work
Mm,
remotely. Or is it something that you've been conditioned to want? You've been
right.
conditioned to say that, okay, you have to be a vice president by this age, or you have to be earning that much money.
Yeah. I think it's important to notice when you're using should statements. Like
Mm,
I should go for that promotion, or I should make this kind of money. And it's important to catch yourself in like, because should is actually a disempowering word. What it does is actually make you realize that you're doing something that's maybe not consistent with your values or your interests or your desires. Because if it's something that you really wanted to do or you're excited about doing, you wouldn't necessarily use the word should. You would say, I want to go for this, or this is so exciting, or I can't wait to work on this, you know? And so I think it's important to catch yourself. And I think you'll see that you're using the word should more often than you expect.
absolutely. I think this is gold. I think this is
Yeah.
like the number one difference between, to
Hmm.
understand, like, what is it that do you want that, or you
Right.
think you should want that.
Yes. I have an exercise in my book, Remotivation, that I really love. It's called renegotiating agreements.
Mhm.
And so what the exercise is about, it's it's identifying those spoken or unspoken agreements you think you have with important people in your life, whether it's a parent, a spouse, a mentor, a professor, someone in your life that you think there's an expectation or an agreement that maybe existed about, what level you should be at, how much money you should make, the title you should have, where you should live. It could be about your personal life, the age you should get married. It could be anything. And really just write down, okay, what are those agreements I think exist between me and this person? And you kind of list them all out. And then you really look at them and say, do these agreements actually exist? Or do I think, or do I assume that they exist? And
Mm,
then to actually have a conversation with that person and say, look, like my assumption is that there's an expectation from you, or maybe that I think you have of me, that I should be a doctor because you were a doctor, or I should marry this type of person because, that's what our family does. Does
right.
that agreement exist? Is that, or is that just in my head? And it really opens up an amazing dialogue where you get to really understand what expectations and pressures actually exist, or what might be in your head. And then
Right.
you get the opportunity to kind of renegotiate and say, that's not working for me. I need to pursue a life and a career that's more aligned with what I want now and
Mm,
the values that feel good to me now. And maybe we made that agreement 10 years ago or when I was starting my career, but it doesn't work for me right now. And I think it's very liberating to have that conversation, because you might realize like that person says like, I never had that expectation of you. I just want you to be happy. And I thought that would make you happy. But if that's not the case, then what would make you happy, So
this is such a brilliant point again. I think this is a great way to even create boundaries, not only just with other people, but with yourself as well. Because sometimes those agreements, we might not even have made it with other people, but we might have made it with ourselves. So just the act of writing it down and bringing it out in the open, it's like, oh my God, that was so much bullshit.
absolutely. And what's funny? I had an agreement I thought I had with my parents. And I was like, I don't need to say it out loud to them, because I think I know it doesn't really exist, but, I think it's fine. I'll let it, go. But I made myself have the conversation, and I don't think I realized how badly I needed to hear them say, we
Mm,
just want you to be happy. I needed to hear, even though I knew in my core
right.
that was the truth, it was liberating. And I'm telling you, the tears that rolled down my face after just like, it just like liberated me to like feel free to pursue what I wanted, And so I encourage people, like, don't make an assumption. I know it can be an uncomfortable conversation, but whichever way it goes, I think it's important to have the conversation.
Yeah. And I had a similar experience with my husband, and I'm totally blanking out on what it was. Not because I want to hide it. I'm very honest on this podcast, but I'm just blanking out. But it was something to do with some responsibility that I thought I had to do, something like that. And it started as, as a like, a shouting match from me that you always say that, or you always, and he was like, what are you even talking about? And then when we got to the bottom of it, then we realized that it was all in my head, that I had made that agreement and he absolutely does not mean it. I
Right.
would recommend not starting the conversation with a shouting match. That helps.
Absolutely. But you're right. It's so good to clear the air with those kinds of
Yeah.
things. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
All right. So we talked about the two components. The first was
Mm.
money and the next was identity. What about the next one?
Yes. So the next one is routines. So routines has to do with sometimes we do a job or we go to work every day because we did it yesterday, right? And it's like the inertia of our daily life just takes over and we don't take the time to think like, why do I even do this job anymore? Am I enjoying it? Or is it just the comfort of the known, even though the known is not making me happy, is better than the discomfort of the unknown, right? And I know that's, it's very common for a lot of us, and change is so hard. I mean, I teach change management at NYU Stern School of Business and at organizations. And when I poll students or participants in the beginning of my sessions and I ask them, why do you think change is so difficult for people? And I give them different options, but the main one that comes up is about a fear of failure.
Right.
People are just so afraid of the unknown and not being able to control the outcomes and not knowing what those outcomes will be.
Totally.
And that's so normal. And so that's why the third one is like, before we can even tap into what you really want next, we have to get you comfortable with change and open to the idea of taking risks and making decisions without all the information you might need to make those decisions, to help you focus on what you can influence versus what you can't influence.
Hmm.
And I think that step really helps people to get comfortable with even letting themselves dream of new possibilities,
Yeah.
because they're like, oh, that's scary. I can't even let myself dream that like that. And so that's what we get into that routines. Like, what are the things that are just keeping you in motion that maybe you need to create a small catalyst to change?
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's amazing. And I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in that, almost like I call it, the liminal space or the void where, the known is no longer an option anymore, but they still don't know what the next step is. So they are in the unknown, and it can be very scary. And that little, almost like a red thread that you can hang on to, your routines can be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. What I do is there's a 8-step change management process that organizations have used. And I've been part of these teams as a HR professional. Organizations hire these consulting firms like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, to help them create a change management plan when they've been acquired by a new organization or they have new leadership. And there's a specific plan and process they follow. But we as individuals, when we're going through our own versions of change, do it without a plan, without a process, without a support system in place. So I
Yeah.
took this kind of like complex change management plan and I individualized it in as well. And I say, what are the steps you can take when you're going through your own version of change? And even if it's a change you're really excited about, a new home, a marriage, a baby, all of those come with the acceptance of letting go of what was and accepting a new reality, letting go of your single life or where you used to live or certain types of freedoms you had, right? So even with exciting and positive change comes a lot of feelings of loss, right?
For sure.
So taking certain steps to really think about, what are the benefits that are going to come out of this for me? What can I influence? What kind of support do I need? Who needs to know? These kinds of regulations of your emotions can really help you go through that process in a more easy way.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. So we talked about money, we talked about identity and change. And the next one is?
Yes. So the next one is growth. So this is the right, getting people to focus on, okay, once you've managed some of the obstacles in your way around money, identity, and routines, you can focus on, okay, what are the skills and experiences I want to have and develop and grow? And I think it's important for people to realize that just because you're good at something, it doesn't mean that you enjoy doing it. So sometimes we've developed certain skills and experiences over time that have led us to become subject matter experts at a certain topic, but we're kind of like, I don't really enjoy doing this anymore. And there's more I want to learn and develop. And when we're in a job or career where we feel like our growth has been stunted, we're not feeling challenged anymore, it really decreases our motivation. And so it's important to really think about, like, what experiences would I have? What would be, exciting for me to learn? And I talk about the best way to learn new skills. It's called the 70-20-10 growth plan, meaning 70% of the way we learn and acquire knowledge should be through on-the-job practice, like learning by doing, actually having that experience, taking on that project or initiative or collaboration. 20% of the way that we acquire new skills is through learning from others, through mentorship, for shadowing someone, through feedback and support. And the 10% of how we acquire new skills is through formal training, degrees, certifications, online courses, and workshops. Because what often happens is people think, oh, I want to learn a new skill. I'm going to take this online course on it.
Opposite. Yeah. It's like 70%.
Yeah. And that's an important portion, but you have to think holistically. Okay. Let's say I want to become, a manager one day of a team. Okay. So first think about, how do I do that in practice? Okay. Maybe I can mentor a more junior person or someone just starting out in their career, or I could be a leader of a certain team or initiative. Okay. That's how learning through doing. Now the 20% of learning from others, who can I shadow or get mentorship or feedback from that could give me advice on how to be a good leader? And then the 10% might be, okay, I'm taking a LinkedIn learning course on management skills or something like that, right? Yeah. So I always encourage people to really think holistically when you want to develop and grow a certain skill set.
Yeah, that's amazing. I also, I'm being recalled by, this concept of second marriages that you talked about in your TEDx. Does that apply to the growth principle as well? Because sometimes when people want to grow, they feel like they can only do that by quitting their job and then looking for another job. I'm not going to spoil the surprise. I want you to talk about that.
I love this question. So just to give your listeners an idea of what you're talking about. So in my TED Talk, I quote Esther Perel, who's a world-renowned psychotherapist and couples counselor. And she talks about relationships, and she says that in the West today, most of us are going to have 2 or 3 marriages or committed relationships. And some of us are going to do it with the same person. Mm-hmm. And I just was blown away by this quote, because what she's saying is some of us will rebuild and experience a new relationship with the same person.
Right.
And so I tell people that the same thing could be said about your relationship with your job at the same company. Mm-hmm. Or the same career, the same, maybe for the entrepreneurs with their same business, right? It's how do you rebuild something new in a place or with a person or organization that knows you, where you build credibility and a network and trust, and where you might be able to try something you haven't done before because you have built that confidence. And to really make sure people know what you want to learn and do more of and how you want to grow. Because if no one knows, no one can really help you. And what we saw during the last couple of years and, the Great Resignation and all these people quitting their jobs is they thought that they'd have to change their careers or quit their jobs to really get the kind of growth that they were looking for. Only to realize the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And especially for people that wanted to try something new, it's really hard to do that in an organization where you haven't built that credibility or trust yet. It's much easier in a place where you are. And look, sometimes you might try, an organization doesn't give you those opportunities, or they're not willing to invest in your growth and development. In that situation, yes, you have to make the choice. Perhaps, the best choice might be to leave. But I encourage people to start where you are, because you might be surprised at how much you could create that sort of new beginning and fresh start in your current organization. And so ask those questions, share what you want to do more of and how you want to grow, and give your organization or other people a chance to let you flourish.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Love that. All right, let's talk about the sixth component of fulfillment and what drives the career decisions. I believe you said joy.
Well, we actually we have the fifth one, which is
Oh, the fifth
actually
one, sorry.
impact. Yes,
Yes, let's
yes,
talk
we've
about
got
that first. Yes.
impact and then joy. So impact is all about feeling a sense of purpose and that you're providing value. And look, we don't need to work in life-saving industries or create life-changing products to feel like we're making a difference. And I think for a lot of people, when they don't quite understand how the work they're doing is providing value, it's hard for them to feel motivated to do it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, you might think, oh, they have it all. They've got the title, they've got the money, they've got the flexibility, but somehow they're kind of still feeling like something's off. And usually it's because they don't feel like they're making an impact in the way that they'd like to.
Yeah.
And sometimes all it takes is a little more context to understand the impact you're already having. And what I mean by that is, maybe you're not in a client-facing role in your organization or what you do. So you're not hearing firsthand the impact you're having on the client. So maybe you ask your team, hey, can I join that client meeting so I can hear firsthand the challenges that client is having and how I could come up with a customizable solution? Or, oh, remember that presentation I put together and you sent it off to the CEO? What happened? What did they say? What's some feedback you could provide me? I must say, when I worked many, many years ago at the company Avon,
Mhm.
Avon has 6 million sales representatives that sell the products, right? And people used to say to me, like, oh, do you work there because you love beauty and fragrances and makeup? And I was like, no, not really. Because for us, the products were so secondary to what we were doing, which was providing financial independence and
Mm.
freedom to these 6 million women, mostly women sales representatives around the
Mhm.
world. And our mission was so clear that what we did was for them. And
Mm.
we just happened to create great products that they could sell. But we, at every meeting, it was clear, like, I'm doing air quotes, she pays our bills and our salary.
Right.
She's the one we do this for. When we would toast at a dinner, we would say, to the representative. The company would bring those women in to tell us stories of how Avon had changed their lives. And it was so moving because it was so clear why we did what we did.
Yeah.
And everyone was so, regardless if you were in finance, marketing, HR, everyone was so connected to the purpose, the greater purpose of their role. And I found it to be incredibly inspiring. So nothing about my role changed. I wasn't suddenly creating, life-changing products, but I got, every time I would speak to these representatives, I would get a deeper connection of why I was doing what I was doing. And it was so motivating. And I think that's what a lot of people are desiring and missing, especially the younger generations. They're saying, like, they're willing to forsake some salary to feel more connection to the purpose of their work.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a brilliant point. I think that this can be another podcast, topic altogether, because I believe the why is very important, as Simon Sinek would agree. But the who informs the why. I think the who we are impacting, because I believe as human beings, we are wired for meaning and we are wired for making that connection and making an impact. And without it, we can definitely feel a loss of motivation. So that is
Yeah.
brilliant. I love
Can,
that.
can I tell you a funny story about
For
Simon
sure.
Sinek?
Yes.
So I had an opportunity to meet him once he spoke at an event. It was a pretty small event, and he was taking questions afterwards. And so I raised my hand and I said, hi, Simon, I am the head of HR and talent development at my company at the time. And I'm working on this new initiative, and it's all about, really motivating our employees. And some of the leaders are really behind it. They're implementing what I've taught them, and they are really excited about it. And others are like rolling their eyes at me. They can't be bothered. They don't want to implement it. how do I connect with that second group of people? And he goes, you don't. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, those aren't your people. Those aren't your change makers. Those aren't your future leaders. And I said, so I just focus on the first group and, and help them make a difference and forget about the second. He goes, yep. And that was it. And I was like, wow. And it was just to your point, Dee, because you were saying it's all also about the who, right? We have to focus on those people that, we want everyone to love us. We want everyone to, take our ideas and implement them, but not everyone's going to be into what we have to offer. And so focusing on those who get our message, who believe in it, who want to take it forward, that's so important. And if you can make a difference with that smaller percentage of people, then you can start to see the ripple effects on others. But sometimes it's not worth it to spend our time trying to serve everyone.
Yeah, so true. Amazing. I love that response from Simon Sinek.
Yeah. I was like, oh, it's that simple. Okay.
Right. All right. Let's talk about joy. I do have another question about joy, but I want to hear what you have to say on that.
Yes. So joy, the kind of peak motivator. And joy is when we do our work because the work itself is its own reward.
Yeah.
The work is fun. It's interesting. It's creative. It allows us to, think outside the box. And it's difficult to get there when we haven't done those other steps, right? When we haven't managed our relationship to money, identity, routines, and growth and impact. But I encourage people to really think about what kind of work they love doing. What would they love to do more of? And sometimes it's hard for them to think about it because it's been so long. So I encourage them to think back on those times where you came home from work and you said to your partner or a friend, like, oh, today was such a good day at work. I got to do this, I got to do that. And you're feeling energized instead of totally depleted of energy. So what were you working on at that time? What skills were you using? What projects? What were the conditions? What was your manager like? Like having them, I ask people to really think back on those times where they felt that kind of energy.
Right.
And then how can they do more of that in their current organization or company? And sometimes people think like, oh, if I just focus on the work I love, like, my company wouldn't let me do that, or I wouldn't impact the business. So I have them do what I call a quality quadrant, which I mean focusing more on the quality of work rather than the quantity of work. So if you can imagine like an x-axis and a y-axis. So on the x-axis is like from one side, it's how much fun the work is. So from not fun at all to really fun. And on the y-axis is how much impact it has on the business. So from low impact to high impact. So then you can start to plot the things that you work on and say like, okay, this task is really enjoyable for me and it has a big impact on the business. Great. How can I do more of that? How can I duplicate that kind of work? How do I prioritize that kind of work?
Right.
And this task, I really don't like doing at all. And actually it has very low impact on the business. Okay. Well, how do we minimize that? How do we automate that? How do we just take it away if it's not serving us? So you start to really see like, what's that sweet spot, right? That win-win of both doing work you enjoy that also has an impact. And it's really helpful to see it visually.
Yeah, it's amazing. Eons ago, I used to work with Bank of America. I was their corporate lead there. And we used to do a training for the C-suite called Situational Leadership by Ken Blanchard. And he had something like that as well. Of course, that was more on the delegation and what kind of leader you are. But you had to think about the tasks you do and which are high impact, which create more joy. And then you delegate those tasks accordingly. So this, and I can see this working for everybody and not just people in corporate, but even for, business people, like, people who run their own business. And even at home, I can see it working for our chores and
absolutely
things that we do, because, hey, fulfillment can be for everything, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I want to talk to you about one of the things that you said in your TEDx talk. And I was like, wow, this is like, I have said this before, but I've never heard this say like this before. And you came out and said that, hey, listen, like happiness is a feeling that doesn't last. Right. And fulfillment on the other side is richer and long lasting. And that can send people into like, what? Like all this time I was doing all this so that I can be happy and I can make my family happy. And what if like it doesn't last? And I believe it to be true. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I knew that would be a little controversial,
Good.
But like, no, nothing wrong with striving for happiness, but happiness also often depends on external circumstances. And it's often these moments, and they're beautiful moments. And yes, we all want these beautiful moments, and many beautiful moments, of course, can make us feel great. But what I encourage people is to look for something that's a little deeper and richer and longer lasting, which is more fulfillment. And happiness, or I call it joy, is one component of fulfillment. So yes, feeling good and joyful and energized and happy is this one part, but that impact component that we spoke about and that growth component, at least as far as when it comes to your career, but even in your life, your growth and your sense of impact don't have to come from your primary job. They can come from other places. But I do believe that the three of them, growth, impact, and joy, combined together, really create that sense of fulfillment that we're looking for. And that's why I said, like, me and some of my friends that I met while traveling were sitting on a beach in Bali and we're feeling happy, yet not fulfilled,
Mm,
right? And there was this difference. It's like, wow, this is so great. We're so lucky. I'm really grateful. But why do I feel like something's missing? And then you feel bad for wanting more when you know you should be grateful for what you have. And
mm,
I think that's the difference for a lot of people who feel happy yet not fulfilled, is they're like,
yeah.
ooh, something's still off.
Yeah. And I think when you are fulfilled, and even if I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast has experienced at least moments of when they were fulfilled, you are always happy and joyful.
Mm,
So
yeah,
it's almost like you can chase happiness alone. And like you
right.
said, usually what we're saying is that when we're doing things on the external, that brings us happiness, like a meal or a dress or a donut
Yes,
or a
yes,
movie. But when we are including all the six components together and striving for fulfillment, that automatically includes joy as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's more of that like deep ocean, calm, like rich feeling, rather than that kind of like, oh, bungee jump adrenaline rush that
Right.
happens in a moment?
Yeah, right. And which is good. Like sometimes that's needed too.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
lasting fulfillment, which is what we
Hmm.
need to be motivated at work,
Yes,
we want to be fulfilled rather than happy.
exactly.
Awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much. This is so good, so great. Tell us, where can the listeners find you?
Thank you so much. I loved being on this show, Deepshika. Listeners can find me on my website, sarahaviram.com. They can check out my TEDx called Does More Freedom at Work Mean More Fulfillment? And finally, I have a book they can find anywhere books are sold. It's called Remotivation, the Remote Worker's Ultimate Guide to Life-Changing Fulfillment.
Amazing. I love that. And we're going to link all of that in the show notes. And everybody should definitely check out the TEDx and share it with the people that you know, because you don't know who needs it. Share this podcast as well. Thank you again, Sarah. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you liked this one or any other episode, there are 3 ways you can support us. Number 1, come home. Start your journey. That's literally the whole point of this podcast. To inspire you, to empower you, and to give you the knowledge and tools so you remember who you really are. Number 2, I'd be so grateful if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps us get in front of more people. Number 3, share it with someone, a friend, a family member, a loved one, a peer. You never know how much someone needs to hear this today. Thank you again, and until next time, remember, you're whole, you're enough, you're worthy, you're unlimited, and you are perfect just the way you are. I'll see you next time.